All right, we're going to begin with Chapter 1, What is Psychology? This is the first of two chapters in Unit 1, Introduction to Psychology. Section 1 will take a look at why we study psychology. And our main idea for this section is that psychology is a science. Like other scientists, psychologists seek to explain and control behavior and mental processes and test their ideas through research methods. So in order to understand behavior and mental processes, we need to know what those two terms mean. Psychology, again, is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. A behavior is any action that people can observe or measure, such as walking, talking, sleeping, and eating. Your cognitive activities are mental processes, and they include dreams, perceptions, thoughts, and memories. Emotions can affect both behavior and mental processes. And in order to study emotions, psychologists might use psychological constructs to help them study what we can't see, touch, or measure directly. There are two goals of psychology: to explain behavior and predict and control it. So the first one, explaining behavior. Psychologists observe and describe behavior and mental processes to better understand them. This helps psychologists to explain, predict, and help clients control behavior. The goal of controlling behavior and mental processes is to help people accomplish their own goals. Psychologists don't want to have complete mind control over their patient. It's all about helping someone achieve a goal. Psychology as a science is a social science rooted in the natural sciences. Social sciences include history, anthropology, economics, poli-sci, and sociology. Your natural sciences include biology, chemistry, and physics. Some areas of psychology are closely related to the natural sciences. Both natural scientists and psychologists do scientific research to do their work. And when we look at parts of the brain, that will go along with biology. Section 2, what do psychologists do? Your main idea. Psychologists work in many different fields, but they all focus on studying and explaining behavior and mental processes. We'll take a look at the major fields of psychology. The first one is clinical, and this is what most psychologists are. They include child mental health, adult mental health, learning disabilities, geriatrics, which is old age, and general health. And they tend to treat people with psychological problems such as anxiety or depression or severe psychological disorders. It's important to note that psychologists are not psychiatrists. They are two different things. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who specializes in psychological problems and who can prescribe medication for clients. Psychologists can't prescribe medication. Next, you have counseling psychologists, and they typically treat people who have adjustment problems. School psychologists identify and help students who have problems that interfere with learning. Educational psychologists focus on course planning and instructional methods for an entire school system rather than for an individual student. Developmental psychologists study changes that occur throughout a person's lifespan, and that will be Unit 2 for us. Personality psychologists identify and study human characteristics or traits. Social psychologists are concerned with people's social behavior, and they focus on external rather than internal influences. And experimental psychologists conduct experimental research into basic processes such as functions of the nervous system, sensation and perception, learning and memory, and thinking and motivation. If you'd like to have a career in psychology, you can go into specialized fields. Environmental psychology looks at how people influence and are influenced by their physical environment. Comparative psychology is the study of animal behavior across different species. And consumer psychology is the study of the behavior of shoppers. Some applied fields, you have industrial and organizational psychology. Industrial psychology is the study of people and work, and organizational is the study of how people behave in organizations. And when you are industrial and organizational psychologists, you tend to be trained in both areas. Human factors psychologists try to find the best ways to design products for people to use. Community psychologists study and help create social systems that promote and foster individual well-being. Forensic psychologists work in the criminal justice system. They work with defendants, they study criminal behavior, and work with police departments to help select police officers, help officers cope with stress, and to train officers in handling dangerous situations. Health psychologists study how behavior and mental processes relate to physical health. Rehabilitation psychologists work with people challenged by a disability, and cross-cultural psychologists study behavior and mental processes under different cultural conditions. All right, section 3, a history of psychology. Your main idea: since ancient times, philosophers and scientists have studied behavior and mental processes. Psychologists throughout history have continued to refine and develop these studies. Our early views and beliefs. Psychology is as old as human history. It's a written account of the interests of people's actions, motives, and thoughts can be traced to ancient times. We'll go back to ancient Greece first. Socrates, the philosopher, developed a method of learning called introspection, which means to carefully examine our own thoughts and feelings. Another well-known philosopher, Aristotle, outlined associationism, the theory that association with past experiences is a basic principle of mental activity. And then you move to the Middle Ages, not a happy time for most people. You had the plague going on, very dark age. Most Europeans of this period believed that psychological problems were caused by possession by demons. Again, not a happy time to be living. They used certain tests to determine whether a person was possessed, and usually it did not end well for a person if it was determined they were possessed. And then we have the late 1800s, and we start with our pioneers in psychology. Most historians of psychology point to the year 1879 as the beginning of psychology as a modern laboratory science. In that year, German psychologist Wilhelm Wundt established his laboratory in the city of Leipzig, Germany. Wundt founded a field of psychology known as structuralism. And structuralism focused on the basic elements of consciousness. Wundt broke down consciousness into objective sensations and subjective feelings. And structuralists believed that the human mind functioned by combining objective sensations and subjective feelings. Next guy was William James and functionalism. And he believed that experience is a continuous stream of consciousness. So he's one of the founders of functionalism. And functionalism is the study of how mental processes help organisms adapt to their environment. Third guy is Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. Freud was one of the most famous of the early psychologists, and he developed psychoanalysis, which emphasized unconscious motives and internal conflicts in human behavior. He developed psychodynamic thinking, which assumes that most of what exists in an individual's mind is unconscious and consists of conflicting impulses, urges, and wishes. He theorized that the key to human behavior is satisfying desires. Then we'll move into modern developments in psychology. We have two behaviorists. The first one is John Watson, and he founded the School of Behaviorism, which defines psychology as the scientific study of observable behavior. And it holds that people can be totally conditioned by external events, and that belief in individual choice is just an illusion. Taking that a little bit further was B.F. Skinner and reinforcement. He added to the behaviorist tradition by adding reinforcement, and he showed that animals that are reinforced or rewarded for a certain action are more likely to perform that action again. And he believed that people learn in the same way animals do. And then finally, we'll take a look at the Gestalt school in our modern developments. Gestalt psychology is an alternative to behaviorism and structuralism, and it's developed by German psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, and Wolfgang Kohler. It's based on the ideas that our perceptions of objects are more than the sum of their parts, and they are wholes that give shape or meaning to the parts. Gestalt psychology can be demonstrated in a few principles. There's about 6 or 7 of them, but we'll just go over a couple of them. So the first one is similarity, and that is similar objects are grouped together. So you see in the picture there, you have the two T's are grouped together because they are similar. The second principle is closure, and that's you perceive an object as whole even when it's not. And if you look at the G on your screen, you know that it's a G even though there's a huge gap in it. Next principle is continuation. And that's when two objects intersect, they're seen as two separate objects. And we'll look at the S that has the I going through it. You can see that the S, and you can see that there's an I. Next is proximity. Objects that are close form groups. So if you look at the E, you can see that all the black cubes together are going to form the letter E, and then the gray cubes are going to form the background. And that leads us right into the last one, which is figure and background. And you separate the figure from the background, and each becomes its own figure. So if you take a look at the A in Gestalt, there's a tree within the letter A. And once you see that tree, you can now see the tree and the letter A as two separate figures. All right, last section is 4 contemporary perspectives. Your main idea: contemporary psychologists have been influenced by the work of earlier pioneers. They have expanded traditional research to develop new and different approaches. We'll look at the role of biology, the role of the mind, and the role of experience. In the role of biology, you have the biological perspective and the evolutionary perspective. The biological perspective of psychology emphasizes the influence of biology on our behavior, and it makes connections between the brain and behavior, and also the influence of hormones and genes. Evolutionary perspective focuses on the evolution of behavior and mental processes, and they suggest that many kinds of behavior patterns are examples of adaptive behavior. So you're learning to adapt to your environment. In the role of the mind, there is the cognitive perspective, the humanistic perspective, and the psychoanalytic perspective. The cognitive perspective emphasizes the role that thoughts play in determining behavior, and has its roots in Socrates' maxim, know thyself. Many cognitive psychologists have been influenced by information processing and computer sciences. The humanistic perspective stresses the human capacity for self-fulfillment and the importance of consciousness, self-awareness, and the capacity to make choices. According to this perspective, personal experiences are the most important aspect of psychology. And the psychoanalytic perspective, this is Freud, stresses the influence of unconscious forces on human behavior. Psychologists who follow this approach focus on conscious choice, and though it no longer dominates the field, its influence continues to be felt. And the third is the role of experience, and within that we have 3 different perspectives. The first is the learning perspective. The learning perspective emphasizes the effects of experience on behavior. In contrast, social learning theory suggests that people can change their environment or create new ones. Psychologists who take the learning perspective believe that behavior is learned either from direct experience or by observing other people. In the sociocultural perspective, it focuses on the influence of ethnicity, gender, culture, and socioeconomic status on behavior and mental processes. So it's more about the environment. And the third is the biopsychosocial perspective. And this holds that mental processes are influenced by the interaction of biological processes, psychological dispositions, and social factors. So it kind of goes and connects a lot of the different perspectives. This is a holistic approach that dates back to ancient Greece, and the modern model was developed by American physician George Engel. And it was developed in relation to the treatment of heart disease. Cultural, social, and psychological factors and genetic disposition, as well as diet, exercise, stress levels, and financial status all have a bearing on heart disease, according to Engel. And that is it for Chapter 1, What is Psychology? Remember, go through with your notes. You want to leave space after each main idea so you can go back and fill in more information together as a class. And if you miss anything, go back, restart it, pause whenever you need it. All right, see you guys in class.